I was 19 years old the first time I put on the uniform. It was a Tuesday morning in October, and the recruiter had told me to show up at 6. I showed up at 5:45. That was the kind of person I was. That was the kind of person I had always been. My name is Sergeant First Class Renata Voss. And I need to tell you something before I tell you anything else. I did not join the army because I had nowhere else to go. I joined because I had looked at every door in front of me, and the army was the only one that felt like it was built for someone like me. Someone who needed structure the way other people need sleep. Someone who felt most herself when the task was clear and the standard was written down. I grew up in Clarksville, Tennessee, right outside Fort Campbell. I watched soldiers my whole life. Watched them in the DFAC lines at 6 in the morning. Watched them at the PX on Fridays buying things for their families. Watched them in their ACUs walking through the Walmart parking lot on Tuesdays like they owned the pavement and apologized for nothing. I wanted that walk. My mother waitressed at a diner on Highway 41A for 22 years. Same apron. Same route. Same customers who called her by her first name and left $2 tips on a $14 check. She never complained. She was the hardest working woman I have ever known, and she never once asked the world for more than it offered her. I was not built like that. I enlisted at 19. Made specialist by 21. Staff sergeant by 25. I deployed twice. Once to Kuwait, once to a forward operating base in eastern Afghanistan, where the wind came off the mountains at night and cut straight through your jacket no matter how many layers you had on. I came home from that second deployment at 28 years old, and I had a chest full of commendations, a storage unit in Clarksville, and a body that had learned to sleep 4 hours and function on black coffee and sheer will. I also came home to Marcus Voss. My husband of 3 years at that point. He had a wide smile and hands that were always warm, even in January. He worked HVAC. Had his own small company. Drove a white work truck with Voss Climate Solutions printed on the side in dark blue letters. He used to say he fixed the air so people could breathe. I used to think that was the most honest thing about him. He was the kind of man who remembered your coffee order and showed up with it without being asked. The kind of man who fixed the neighbor's furnace on a Saturday morning because she was 73 and her son lived in Phoenix. The kind of man who, when I called him from overseas at 2 in the morning, answered on the second ring every single time. I want you to understand that before I tell you anything else. I want you to understand that I loved him the way soldiers love things. Completely. Without a lot of words. With actions instead. I had a blue enamel coffee mug I kept on my desk at the unit. He had given it to me before my second deployment. He pressed it into my hands at the departure ceremony at Fort Campbell and said, "Bring this back." So I know you're coming with it. I brought it back. I should have paid more attention to what he was doing while I was gone. Before I go any further, I want to ask you something. If this story is already pulling at something in you, please subscribe to this channel. There are voices here that deserve to be heard. And drop a comment. Tell me one thing. What part of this story are you feeling right now? Write it below. Tell me what city you are watching from. Tell me what time it is where you are. Because somewhere right now it is 5:45 in the morning and someone is already up. I want to know if that someone is you. But I did not know that yet. What I knew coming off that deployment was that I was tired in a way that sleep did not fix. I was 31 days past my 28th birthday. I had been in country for 9 months. And I wanted nothing more than to sit in my own kitchen, drink coffee from that blue mug, and listen to my husband talk about something that had nothing to do with sand or risk assessments or the sound a vehicle makes when something underneath it is wrong. I got that. For a while. And that while was enough to make me stop watching. That is the part that still sits with me when the house is quiet. Not what he did. What I stopped doing. Marcus Voss was not a complicated man. That was what I loved about him. That was also, I would learn, what made what he did so much harder to see. He did not scheme in the way people imagine schemers do. He did not plan things out in a notebook or cover his tracks with elaborate lies. He just moved slowly in a direction and kept moving and trusted that I was busy enough with my own life that I would not notice the drift. He was right about that for longer than I want to admit. He had grown up in Hopkinsville, Kentucky, 40 minutes up 41A from Clarksville. His father had been a plumber. His uncle had been an electrician. Marcus had learned HVAC from a man named Gene Bradshaw who ran a two-truck operation and let Marcus ride along at 16 for $10 a day and lunch. By the time I met him at 24, he had his own certification, his own tools, and a work ethic that matched mine beat for beat. That was what drew me in first. Not his smile. The fact that he showed up. He showed up at a Soldiers and Families Appreciation event at Fort Campbell. His company had donated services. Free HVAC inspections for military housing. He spent 4 hours on a Saturday crawling under units and checking refrigerant levels and did not ask for a single thing in return. I noticed that. We talked for 11 minutes at the food table. He asked what my MS was. I told him I was a 92A, automated logistical specialist. He nodded like he understood what that meant. Later I found out he had looked it up before he called me. That detail mattered to me then. We dated for 14 months. Got married at the Clarksville courthouse on a Wednesday afternoon in March. My first sergeant gave me the afternoon off. Marcus wore a gray suit. I wore my Class A uniform. My mother cried. His mother did not come. She lived in Bowling Green and said the drive was too long. I noted that. Filed it away. Did not say anything. That was a habit of mine. File it away. Note it. Keep moving. Useful in the Army. Not always useful in a marriage. The first 2 years were good. Genuinely good. He ran his company. I ran my section. We ate dinner together 4 nights a week. He coached youth baseball on Saturday mornings. I ran PT routes through the neighborhood before the sun came up. We had a house on Dogwood Lane. 3 bedrooms. One of them Marcus used as an office. The walls were thin, and I could hear him on the phone sometimes when I was in the hallway. Client calls. Vendor calls. Scheduling. Normal sounds. I never stopped to actually listen. That is the thing about living with someone you trust. The sounds become wallpaper. You stop hearing them as information. You just hear them as proof that life is continuing the way it's supposed to. I deployed again at year 2 of our marriage. This time Kuwait. 6 months. He held it down. Paid the bills. Kept the yard. Texted me pictures of the sunset from the back porch every Thursday night without fail. When I came home, he had painted the kitchen. Sage green. He had remembered me saying once, 7 months before deployment, that I thought sage green kitchens looked like somewhere a person could actually rest. He had written it down somewhere. I stood in that kitchen and looked at those walls and I thought, this man hears me. I thought, I am safe here. I want to tell you something about blue-collar people before I go any further. Because this story is about one of them, and it is easy to make this into something simple, and it is not simple. Blue-collar people carry the world on their back, and nobody builds a monument to it. Marcus fixed other people's air so they could breathe in the summer and stay warm in the winter. He showed up at 6 in the morning, and he did not leave until the job was done. There is a dignity in that. There is also, sometimes, a resentment that builds underneath it. Slow and quiet. Like a gas leak you cannot smell until it is already in the walls. I did not know about the resentment. I found out the hard way. But that comes later. What matters right now is that in year 3 of our marriage, I came home from Kuwait, stood in my sage green kitchen, drank coffee from my blue enamel mug, and believed with everything I had that Marcus Voss was exactly who he had always presented himself to be. I was wrong. But I would not find out for another 14 months. And in those 14 months, I would let my guard down in a way that a soldier with my training had no business doing. What I found out next did not arrive all at once. It never does. It came in pieces. Small ones. The kind you can explain away if you are tired enough, or busy enough, or in love enough. I was all 3. I had been back from Kuwait for about 6 weeks when I first noticed something was different. Not wrong. Not yet. Just different. Marcus had always been a talker. Not loud. Not the kind of man who fills a room with noise. But steady. He would come home and tell me about his day the way some people narrate a documentary. The Hendersons on Maple needed a full compressor replacement. Gene Bradshaw's nephew had started his own company and was underbidding everyone by 30%. A woman in Oak Grove had been running her unit without a filter for 2 years, and the coil looked like something from a horror movie. I love those stories. I would sit across from him at the kitchen table with my coffee and my notepad, because I always had a notepad, and I would listen and ask questions, and it felt like the most normal thing in the world. After I came home from Kuwait, those stories got shorter. Then they got sparse. Then some nights there were no stories at all. Just Marcus on his phone at the kitchen table with his plate pushed to the side, typing something with his thumbs while his food went cold. I asked him once what he was working on. He said, "Estimate for a big commercial job. Hotel over in Nashville. Don't worry about it." I did not worry about it. I had my own plate full. I had just been assigned as the property book NCOC for our battalion. New position. High visibility. I was responsible for millions of dollars of equipment accountability, and I took that with the seriousness it deserved. I was at the unit by 05:30 most mornings. Some nights I did not get home until 1900. Marcus was often already in his office with the door closed by the time I walked in. I told myself he was busy. I told myself this was just what happened when two working people hit a busy season at the same time. I told myself the sage green kitchen was still the same kitchen. The first real thing I noticed was a Friday in November. I had come home early. Rare. My first sergeant had dismissed us at 1500 because of a safety stand-down. I walked in the front door at 15:45 and the house was quiet. Marcus's truck was in the driveway. I called his name. No answer. I walked to the back of the house. His office door was open about 4 inches. I could see his desk. He was on the phone. His back was to me. I was not trying to listen. But I heard one sentence before I stepped back. He said, "She doesn't know anything about it. She's never home." Then he laughed. Low. Easy. Like that was a comfortable thing to say. I stood in the hallway for a moment. Then I walked to the kitchen and put my bag down and started making dinner. She doesn't know anything about it. I turned that sentence over in my mind for 3 days. And then I did what I had trained myself not to do. I explained it away. He was probably talking about a client. A business decision I was not involved in. He handled the company. I did not insert myself into his business the way he did not insert himself into my unit operations. That was our agreement. That was how we worked. She doesn't know anything about it. I filed it away. I kept moving. You know that feeling when you have been patient so long that patience itself starts to feel like a mistake. I know that feeling. I just did not know it yet. The second thing happened 3 weeks later. I was doing laundry on a Sunday morning. Marcus was at a youth baseball board meeting. I pulled his work jacket out of the hamper and checked the pockets before I put it in the machine. Habit. I had found a screwdriver in there once and put it through the dryer drum. In the left pocket, I found a receipt. Murfreesboro, Tennessee. A restaurant called Elm and Oak. Dinner for 2. December 3rd. A Tuesday. Marcus had told me he was in Nashville on December 3rd for the commercial hotel estimate. Murfreesboro is not Nashville. Murfreesboro is 45 minutes in the opposite direction. I stood there in the laundry room with that receipt in my hand for a long time. Then I put it back in his pocket. Then I washed the jacket. I want you to understand that I did not put it back because I was afraid of what it meant. I put it back because I was not ready to know. There is a difference. And I had learned in the army that sometimes the most dangerous thing you can do is move before you have enough information. So I waited. I kept my eyes open and my mouth shut and I waited. And while I waited, something happened that I did not expect. Things got better. The next conversation changed everything. But not the way I thought it would. In January, Marcus came home on a Thursday night with flowers. Not roses. I had told him once, early in our relationship, that roses felt like an apology waiting to happen. He had remembered. He brought sunflowers. 12 of them. In a brown paper wrap from the florist on College Street. He set them on the kitchen counter, and he looked at me the way he used to look at me before deployments. That look that was trying to memorize something. He said, "I've been distracted." I know it. I'm sorry. I looked at him. He said, "The Nashville job fell through. I've been stressed about the books and I took it out on the house. That's not fair to you." I said, "Okay." He said, "I mean it, Renata." And I believed him. That is the part that is hardest to explain to someone who has never been in it. You do not believe someone like that because you are naive. You believe them because everything in your history with that person says they are telling you the truth. Because the man standing in front of you with sunflowers is the same man who painted your kitchen sage green from memory. The same man who answered the phone at 2 in the morning from overseas. The same man who looked up your MS before he called you. You believe them because the alternative requires you to dismantle something you built your life inside of. And you're not ready to do that. Not yet. February was the best month we had had in over a year. He was home for dinner almost every night. He put his phone away at the table. He asked about my soldiers, called them by the names I had mentioned, remembered that Specialist Deering was having trouble with her reenlistment paperwork, and asked me 2 weeks later if it had been sorted out. He started coming to bed at the same time I did instead of staying up in his office. On a Saturday in mid-February, he drove us out to land between the lakes. We walked 3 miles of trail and ate sandwiches on a picnic table, and he held my hand the whole drive home. I thought, we found our way back. I thought, the receipt was nothing. I thought, I almost made a mistake. I let my guard down completely. And that is exactly what he needed me to do. March came, and with it a new assignment for me. I was selected for a special duty rotation. Temporary assignment to the G4 shop at division level. 30 days. Long hours. High stakes. I was proud of the assignment. It was the kind of visibility that moved careers. Marcus said all the right things. He said he was proud of me. He said he would handle the house. He said to focus on the mission. I focused on the mission. 30 days of 12-hour days. Sometimes 14. I came home most nights after he was already in bed. Left before he was up. We texted. He sent me coffee shop photos. A picture of the back porch on a Tuesday evening. A selfie with a bad haircut he had gotten without telling me. Normal things. I was so deep in the work that I stopped seeing anything else. That was when he made his move. I did not know it then. I found out later, piecing it together the way you piece together the timeline of an equipment loss. Working backward from the evidence. Filling in the gaps with documentation. What I know now is that during those 30 days in March, while I was at division working 16-hour rotations and trusting my husband to hold down our life, Marcus Voss opened a separate business account. Not in the name of Voss Climate Solutions. In the name of a company I had never heard of. A company that had my name on the LLC filing as a silent partner. Without my signature. Without my knowledge. Without my anything. He had been planning it since November. The receipt in the jacket pocket. The Nashville job that fell through. The sunflowers. All of it was pacing. All of it was timing. And I had walked right into it because I was a soldier who trusted her husband the way she trusted her chain of command. Completely. Without auditing the relationship the way I audited my property book. That was my mistake. I only made it once. I found out on a Thursday evening in April. Not because I went looking. Because the Army taught me one thing above everything else. Always check your paperwork. I had gotten a piece of mail I almost threw away. A letter from the Tennessee Secretary of State's office. Addressed to me. Referencing an LLC registration. A company called RV Thermal Partners. My initials. My name listed as a registered agent. I stood at the kitchen counter in my ACUs, still in my boots, and I read that letter 4 times. Then I set it down on the counter next to my blue enamel mug. I did not move for a long time. And then something settled over me. Quiet and cold and very, very clear. I was not going to cry. I was not going to confront him. Not yet. I was going to do what I was trained to do. I was going to document everything. What I found out next took me 3 weeks to piece together. But when I was done, I had a picture so complete that even I could not explain it away. I want to tell you something about my job before I go further. Because it matters. A property book NCOC does not guess. She does not assume. She does not accept someone's word that the equipment is where it is supposed to be. She goes and physically verifies it. She cross-references serial numbers. She reconciles what the system says against what her eyes tell her. She builds a paper trail so clean and so thorough that if something goes wrong, the record speaks for itself without her having to say a single word. I had been doing that job for 3 years, and I had never once applied those skills to my own household. That ended on a Thursday night in April. I started with what I had. The letter from the Secretary of State. RV Thermal Partners, LLC. Registered in Tennessee. Listed agent. Renata M. Voss. I had not registered any company. I had not signed any documents. I had not given anyone permission to use my name. I photographed the letter front and back, dated the photo, saved it in a folder on my personal laptop that I password protected with a code Marcus did not know. I had always kept my work laptop separate. Old habit. Operational security. It had never felt relevant to my marriage before. It felt relevant now. The next morning, I called the Tennessee Secretary of State's office from my car in the Fort Campbell parking lot before morning formation. I identified myself. I asked for the full filing record for RV Thermal Partners LLC. The clerk told me it had been registered 4 months ago. February 14th. Valentine's Day. The same day Marcus had brought me sunflowers and told me he was sorry for being distracted. I sat in my car and looked at the steering wheel for a moment. Then I asked the clerk to mail me a certified copy of the full filing. She said it would take 7 to 10 business days. I said that was fine. Then I went inside and ran morning formation and accounted for every soldier in my section and did not let a single thing show on my face. That is one thing the Army gives you that nobody talks about. It teaches you to compartmentalize, to lock something in a room in your mind and leave it there until you have the time and the space to open the door safely. I locked it. I kept moving. Over the next 2 weeks, I pulled every document I could access legally and quietly. Our joint bank statements. 3 months back. I was on the account. I had full access. I printed them at the library on Fort Campbell Road, not at home, and I put them in a manila folder inside my ruck in the closet. What I found in those statements was a pattern. Small withdrawals. Never more than $400 at a time. Twice a week. Sometimes 3 times. Always from ATMs in Murfreesboro or Smyrna. Never Clarksville. Never anywhere I would be likely to see the machine. Over 90 days, the withdrawals totaled $11,240. Cash. Untraceable once it left the machine. I wrote every figure down in a small green notebook I bought at the dollar store on Fort Campbell Boulevard. Not a fancy notebook. Nothing that looked important. The kind of thing you would buy to jot grocery lists in. I dated every entry. I kept it in my ACU jacket pocket. The Army had taught me that, too. Keep your documentation close. Never leave it somewhere someone else can access it. I also pulled the vehicle records. Marcus ran his company through 2 trucks. I was co-owner on both vehicle titles because we had bought them together when he expanded the business. I had the right to request maintenance and mileage records from the fleet management app he used. I had never used that right before. I used it now. The mileage logs told a story that the bank statements confirmed. Between October and March, Marcus's work truck had logged 43 trips to Murfreesboro, 11 to Smyrna, 7 to a zip code in Laverne that I did not recognize. He had told me he was in Nashville for most of that period. Nashville is northwest of Clarksville. Murfreesboro, Smyrna, and Laverne are all southeast. A person cannot be in both places. I added the mileage records to the manila folder. The certified filing from the Secretary of State arrived on a Tuesday. I intercepted the mail. I always checked the box first. Marcus rarely did. I opened the envelope in my car. RV Thermal Partners LLC. Filed February 14th. Listed as a heating and cooling services company. Service area, Middle Tennessee. Listed members, Marcus J. Voss, Managing Member. Renata M. Voss, Silent Partner. My signature was on page 4. It was not my signature. I know my own handwriting. I have signed my name on equipment hand receipts and accountability rosters and legal documents for 12 years. My signature has a specific break in the R and a loop in the V that I developed in basic training and have never changed. The signature on that document had neither. It was close. Someone had practiced it. But it was not mine. I sat in my car in the library parking lot and I looked at that signature for a long time. Then I took out my green notebook. I wrote, signature forged. Page 4 of LLC filing. Certified copy in hand. I dated it. I closed the notebook. And I thought about the first sergeant I had served under in Afghanistan. Master Sergeant Dolores Pruitt. 50 years old. 28 years in. She had a saying she used when a situation was worse than you thought and you needed to decide how to proceed. She used to say, slow is smooth. Smooth is fast. I heard her voice in my head in that parking lot. Slow is smooth. Smooth is fast. I was not going to move until I had everything. And I did not have everything yet. There was one more piece I needed. I needed to know who RV Thermal Partners was actually doing business with. And I needed to know if there was a woman named somewhere in those records. Because I had not forgotten the receipt from the restaurant in Murfreesboro. Dinner for two. A Tuesday in December. I had not forgotten. I had just been waiting for the right time to pull that thread. The right time was now. This is where things started to get complicated in a way I had not fully prepared for. I had suspected money. I had suspected a side business built on my name without my consent. What I had not fully let myself suspect was the other part. The dinner. The phone call I had overheard in the hallway. She doesn't know anything about it. I had filed that away for 5 months. It came back now with a weight it had not carried before. I did not confront Marcus. I want to be clear about that. Throughout all of this, I did not raise my voice. I did not go through his phone. I did not follow him. I did not do anything that could be characterized as unstable or reactive. I kept my home life exactly as it had been. I cooked dinner. I asked about his day. I sat across from him at the kitchen table with my coffee, and I listened to whatever he chose to tell me. And I watched. A soldier who has been deployed learns to read a space the way other people read a page. You learn to notice what has changed. What is out of place? What is missing that was there before? What is present that should not be? I applied that skill to my own kitchen table. What I noticed was this. Marcus had started keeping his phone face down. Always. Even when there was no call coming in. Even when he was eating. Even when he left the room to use the bathroom. The phone went with him or it went face down. A man who has nothing to hide does not carry his phone to the bathroom every time. I noted it. I said nothing. The break came on a Wednesday in late April. I had submitted a routine request through our unit's legal assistance office for a JAG consultation. Not about Marcus. Officially, it was about updating my will and reviewing my beneficiary designations. Completely normal. Soldiers do it all the time, especially after returning from deployment. The JAG officer who met with me was a captain named Adiz Okonkwo. Early 30s. Sharp in a way that made you feel like she was reading 3 things simultaneously while talking to you about a 4th. I had brought my documents. All of them. The LLC filing. The bank statements. The mileage logs. My green notebook. The restaurant receipt, which I had retrieved from the jacket pocket before I donated the jacket to Goodwill so Marcus would not look for it. I laid them out on Captain Okonkwo's desk in the order I had assembled them. She did not react immediately. She read everything twice. She made notes on a yellow legal pad in handwriting so small I could not read it from across the desk. When she was done, she set her pen down and looked at me. She said, "You understand that I'm a JAG officer and not a private attorney. I can give you general legal information but not specific legal advice for your civil matter." I said I understood. She said, "Generally speaking, using someone's name on a business filing without their consent and forging their signature on a legal document are serious matters. That falls under identity fraud and potentially wire fraud depending on how the business was operated." I said, "What would someone in this general situation need to do next?" She said, "Generally speaking, that person would want to consult a private attorney who specializes in family law and potentially business fraud. They would want certified copies of all documents. They would want to continue documenting without alerting the other party. And they would want to be very careful about any joint financial accounts." She slid a card across the desk. She said, "That's the civilian attorney in Clarksville. She handles a lot of military family cases. I can't refer you officially, but I can leave her card on my desk." I picked up the card. I thanked Captain Okonkwo. She said, "Sergeant Voss." I stopped at the door. She said, "Whatever you're dealing with, you clearly know how to build a case. Trust that." I walked out of the JAG office into the Fort Campbell afternoon and stood in the parking lot for a moment with the sun on my face. Then I took out my green notebook and wrote down the date and what had been discussed in general terms. Slow is smooth. Smooth is fast. The attorney's name was Patricia Helm. She had an office on Franklin Street in downtown Clarksville. 3rd floor of a building that used to be a hardware store. You could still see the ghost of the old sign on the brick if you looked at the right angle from the sidewalk. I met with her on a Friday afternoon. I had taken personal leave. I told Marcus I had a dental appointment at the Blanchfield Army Community Hospital. Patricia Helm was in her mid-50s. Gray hair cut short and close. Reading glasses on a chain. She had a way of sitting very still while you talked that made you feel like every word was being weighed. I laid everything out the same way I had for Captain Okonkwo. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "The forged signature is your strongest piece of evidence. That alone establishes that this was done without your knowledge or consent. The bank withdrawals establish a pattern of financial behavior that will be relevant in divorce proceedings. The mileage discrepancies corroborate the timeline." She paused. She said, "I want to ask you something directly. Do you have reason to believe there's another person involved? Romantically?" I thought about the receipt. I thought about the phone call in the hallway. She doesn't know anything about it. I said, "I have circumstantial evidence of it. Nothing direct." She said, "It may or may not become relevant depending on how proceedings unfold. Tennessee is a no-fault divorce state, so infidelity doesn't affect the division of marital assets directly. However, if marital funds were used to benefit a third party, that is considered dissipation of marital assets and the court can account for it." She said, "I need you to keep documenting. Don't move money. Don't change accounts. Don't tip him off. Let me file a motion to freeze the business account once we're ready to move. Do you understand?" I said I understood. She said, "How are you holding up?" I looked at her. I said, "I've been in worse positions with less information." She almost smiled. I almost did too. I drove home on Franklin Street with the windows down even though it was only 62 degrees. I needed the air. I needed to feel something moving. I passed the florist on College Street where Marcus had bought the sunflowers in January. I did not stop. I kept driving. When I got home, I made dinner and Marcus told me about a commercial job in Gallatin that was going to be good for the summer books. I said that sounded promising. I put a plate in front of him. I sat across the table. I drank my coffee from my blue enamel mug. And I thought about Patricia Helm's office on Franklin Street and the motion she was going to file and the frozen account and what Marcus's face was going to look like when he realized that the most organized person he had ever underestimated had been sitting across from him at this table the whole time. I did not smile. But something in me settled. Something that had been pulled tight for a very long time finally found a place to rest. What happened next I did not plan for. And that is the thing about building a case carefully and quietly. You control your side of it. You do not control when the other side makes a mistake. Marcus made his mistake on a Sunday. It was early May. I had been documenting for 6 weeks. Patricia Helm had the full file. We were 2 weeks away from her filing the motion to freeze the RV Thermal Partners account. Everything was on schedule. Everything was measured and deliberate and moving at exactly the pace I had set. And then Marcus left his laptop open on the kitchen table. He had gone outside to take a call. I could see him through the kitchen window, pacing the back porch the way he did when a conversation required movement. His phone was to his ear. His back was to the house. His laptop was open. I was not going to look. I want to be honest about that. I had made a decision early in this process that I was not going to go through his devices. Not because I was not curious. Because I did not need to. I had enough. Patricia Helm had told me I had enough. But the laptop was open. And the screen had not gone to sleep yet. And what was on the screen was an email. I did not touch the laptop. I read what was visible from where I was standing. The email was addressed to someone whose name I will not say here. I will call her what she was in the context of my marriage. The other person. The email said the account was almost funded enough. It said another 2 months and they would have what they needed. It said Renata has no idea any of this exists. It said I'll handle everything on my end. Just be patient. I read it twice. Then I walked to the bedroom and I sat on the edge of the bed and I looked at the floor. I had known. On some level I had known since December. Since the receipt in the jacket pocket. Since the sentence in the hallway. But knowing and seeing are two different things. Seeing it in his words on a screen he had left open on my kitchen table. That landed differently. I sat there for what I later estimated was about 4 minutes. I know because I looked at the clock when I sat down and looked at it again when I stood up. 4 minutes. That was all I allowed myself. Then I stood up. I smoothed the front of my PT shirt. I walked back to the kitchen. I poured myself a cup of coffee from the pot into my blue enamel mug. I sat down at the kitchen table with the logistics manual I had brought home from work. When Marcus came back inside, I was reading. He closed the laptop without looking at the screen. He said, "Sorry about that. Client issue." I said, "No problem." He said, "What do you want to do for dinner?" I said, "I was thinking that chicken soup. The one with the wild rice." He said that sounded good. And he went to wash his hands, and I sat at that table with my coffee and my manual, and I did not let a single thing show on my face. Not one thing. I called Patricia Helm first thing Monday morning. I told her what I had seen. I did not embellish. I did not editorialize. I told her the exact words I had read on that screen in the sequence I had read them. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "That changes the timeline. I want to move the freeze motion up. I'm going to file this week." I said, "What does that mean for me?" She said, "It means within 72 hours of filing, the court will issue a temporary freeze on the RV Thermal Partners account pending investigation. Marcus will be served. He will know at that point that you know." I said, "What should I do between now and then?" She said, "Exactly what you've been doing. Nothing different. Nothing that tips him off. Can you do that?" I said, "I've been doing it for 6 weeks. I can do it for 3 more days." She said, "Sergeant Voss, I've had a lot of military spouses in my office. You are the most composed person I have worked with in 20 years of family law." "I mean that." I said, "I was trained by people who didn't allow another option." She said she would call me when the motion was filed. I thanked her and hung up and went back inside and made Marcus breakfast. Eggs, wheat toast, black coffee. The same breakfast I had made him for 6 years. He ate every bite. He had no idea. Those 3 days were the longest of my career, and I have spent nights in a forward operating base listening to the wind come off the mountains and wondering if the sound outside the wire was the wind or something else. This was longer. I went to work. I ran my section. I accounted for my property. I sat in planning meetings and briefed commanders and signed hand receipts and did every piece of my job with the same precision I had brought to it for 12 years. I came home and cooked dinner and asked about Marcus's day and listened to whatever he chose to tell me. On Tuesday night, he told me about a new residential account in Hendersonville. Big house. Good contract. On Wednesday night, he told me the youth baseball team had won their scrimmage. On Wednesday night, I lay in bed next to him in the dark and listened to him breathe and thought about the email on his laptop and the $11,240 in cash withdrawals and the forged signature on page 4 and the restaurant receipt from Murfreesboro and the name I would not say out loud. I thought about all of it. And then I closed my eyes and I slept. Because a soldier who cannot sleep before the mission is a soldier who cannot function during it. I slept. Patricia Helm called me on Thursday at 1400. I was in my car in the Fort Campbell parking lot. She said, "It's filed. The freeze is in place. He'll be served this afternoon by a process server." I said, "Understood." She said, "Are you somewhere safe?" I said, "I'm on post." She said, "Good. Go home when you're ready. But Sergeant Voss, prepare yourself. When someone is served and they weren't expecting it, the reaction can be unpredictable." I said, "I've dealt with unpredictable before." She said, "I know you have. Call me if anything happens tonight." I thanked her. I sat in my car for a few minutes. Then I took my green notebook out of my ACU jacket pocket. I opened it to the last entry. I wrote, "Motion filed. Account frozen. Thursday, 1400 hours." I closed the notebook. I started the car. I drove home on Fort Campbell Boulevard and turned onto Dogwood Lane and pulled into my own driveway and sat for a moment looking at the white work truck with Voss Climate Solutions in dark blue letters on the side. Then I got out of the car and walked inside. Marcus was sitting at the kitchen table when I walked in. He was not on his phone. He was not on his laptop. He was just sitting there, both hands flat on the table, a piece of paper in front of him. The process server had already come and gone. I set my keys on the counter. I set my bag down. I walked to the coffee maker and poured myself a cup. I had bought a second blue enamel mug at the PX 3 weeks ago without telling Marcus. Just in case. I used the original one now. Same as always. I sat down across from him. He looked at me. His face was doing something complicated that I did not have a name for. It was not anger. Not yet. It was something closer to recalibration. The look of a person whose model of a situation has just been proven wrong and who is working fast to build a new one. He said, "How long have you known?" I said, long enough. He said, Renata. I said, Marcus. He said, it's not what you think. I looked at him. I said, tell me what it is then. He said the business had been struggling. He said he had made some decisions he was not proud of. He said he had needed a separate account to manage some cash flow issues, and he had not wanted to worry me while I was on the special duty rotation. He did not mention the forged signature. He did not mention the other person. He did not mention the $11,240. I let him finish. Then I said, I have the LLC filing. I have the bank statements. I have the mileage logs. I have the restaurant receipt from Murfreesboro. I have your email. He went very still. I said, I have a private attorney and a case that is already filed with the court. The RV Thermal Partners account is frozen as of this afternoon. His jaw moved but nothing came out. I said, I am not going to yell at you. I am not going to ask you to explain yourself. You have had months to tell me the truth and you chose not to. That is its own answer. He said, Renata, please. I said, I need you to find somewhere else to stay tonight. You can take the truck. I will have Patricia Helm's office contact your attorney when you have one. He said, you're serious. I looked at him with the same face I used in the field when a soldier needed to understand that what I was saying was not a suggestion. I said, I have never been more serious about anything in my life. He looked at the paper in front of him. He looked at me. He looked away. He stood up from the table. He went to the bedroom. I heard the closet open. The sound of a bag being pulled from the shelf. I sat at the kitchen table. I drank my coffee. I did not move. 22 minutes later, he came back through with a duffel. He stopped in the kitchen doorway. He said, I didn't think you'd ever find out. I said, I know. He said, that's not an excuse. I said, no, it's not. He stood there for a moment longer. Then he walked out the front door. I heard the truck start. I heard it back out of the driveway. I heard it go down Dogwood Lane. And then the house was quiet. The kind of quiet that has weight. The kind of quiet that takes up space. I sat in it for a long time. Then I got up and I washed both coffee cups. The original blue enamel mug and the one I had bought at the PX. I dried them and set them side by side on the counter. Then I went in my room and I called my mother. She answered on the second ring. I said, Mama, I need to tell you something. She said, baby, I'm right here. And that was the first time in 6 months that I let something show on my face. In my own bedroom with the door closed and my mother's voice on the phone. That was the only place I allowed it. And then I wiped my face and I made a list of everything I needed to do in the morning. Because that is what soldiers do. We grieve in private. And then we get back to work. I need to take a breath here before I tell you what came next. Because what happened in the weeks after Marcus left the house on Dogwood Lane was a different kind of thing entirely. It was not dramatic. It was not loud. It did not happen in a courtroom or a lawyer's office or a moment that anyone watching from the outside would have recognized as significant. It happened in spreadsheets and certified mail and phone calls taken in parking lots and evenings alone in a sage green kitchen with a blue enamel mug and a green notebook and a woman who had decided that she was going to see this through with the same discipline she had brought to every other mission she had ever been assigned. That is the part nobody tells you about justice. It is not a moment. It is a process. And the process is slow and unglamorous, and it requires you to show up for it the same way you show up for PT at 05:30. Not because you feel like it. Because the standard requires it. I showed up. Every single day. I showed up. The first week after Marcus left, I did 3 things. I opened a personal checking account at a credit union on Fort Campbell Boulevard in my name only. I transferred my direct deposit from the joint account. I left enough in the joint account to cover the mortgage for 30 days while the legal process established a temporary order. I called my chain of command. Not to tell them everything. Soldiers do not owe their chain of command the details of their personal lives. But my first sergeant needed to know that I was managing a legal situation that might require occasional personal leave. First Sergeant Carol Witt had been in 21 years. She had seen everything. She listened. She said, you keep doing your job and I'll make sure you have what you need. Whatever else is happening stays outside my formation. I thanked her. I meant it. And I called my mother and asked her to come up from Clarksville proper for the weekend. She showed up Friday evening with a cast iron pot full of chicken and dumplings and an overnight bag, and she did not ask me a single question I was not ready to answer. She just set the pot on the stove and hugged me for a long time in the kitchen doorway. My mother. 22 years of $2 tips and a worn apron and a diner on Highway 41A. The hardest working woman I have ever known. I held onto her in that kitchen for longer than I had held onto anything in a long time. Then I set the table and we ate, and she told me stories about the regulars at the diner, and I laughed twice and meant it both times. That was the best evening of those first weeks. Simple. Quiet. Real. Patricia Helm moved efficiently. Within 10 days of the initial filing, she had subpoenaed the full financial records of RV Thermal Partners, LLC. Bank statements. Vendor contracts. Client invoices. Everything the account had touched since its February 14th registration. What those records showed was methodical and deliberate and, from a purely technical standpoint, not unintelligent. Marcus had been routing cash payments from residential HVAC clients through RV Thermal Partners rather than through Voss Climate Solutions. The payments were real jobs. Real work. Real clients who had no idea their payments were going into a separate account under a company name they had never agreed to do business with. The cash withdrawals from our joint account had been used to cover the operating costs of RV Thermal Partners in its early months so that the new account would not show a deficit. He had been funding a shadow company with our marital money while listing me as a silent partner without my consent. The intent was clear. When he had enough capital in RV Thermal Partners, he was going to walk. He was going to leave Voss Climate Solutions and our joint finances behind and start over under a new name with a funded account that he believed was legally complicated enough by my listed involvement that I would have trouble contesting it. It was not a stupid plan. It had one problem. He had built it around the assumption that I was not paying attention. He had chosen the wrong woman to make that assumption about. Patricia Helm explained the dissipation claim to me on a Tuesday morning in her office on Franklin Street. She said, the court can treat the marital funds used to capitalize RV Thermal Partners as dissipation of marital assets. That means those funds are added back into the marital estate for purposes of division. You are entitled to half of the total marital estate, including those funds. She said, the forged signature is a separate matter. That is identity fraud. I have referred that to the district attorney's office. Whether they pursue charges is their decision. But the referral is on record. I said, what is the realistic timeline? She said, if he contests everything, 12 to 18 months. If he cooperates, we can potentially resolve the financial division within 6 to 9 months. The criminal referral runs on its own timeline. I said, what do you think you will do? She looked at me over her reading glasses. She said, I think when his attorney explains to him what the forged signature referral means, he will be motivated to cooperate on the civil side. She was right. Marcus hired an attorney named Gerald Finch out of Nashville. Patricia Helm contacted me after their first communication. Gerald Finch had said his client wanted to explore a negotiated settlement. Patricia Helm called me after that conversation. She said, he wants to settle. I want to make sure you know what that means before we respond. It means faster resolution, but it requires compromise on both sides. I said, what are our strongest points? She listed them. The forged signature. The $11,240 in documented cash withdrawals. The full capitalization of RV Thermal Partners using marital funds. The mileage logs corroborating the Murfreesboro timeline. She said, we are in a strong position. I want you to know that before we sit down with them. I said, then let's sit down. The settlement negotiation took 3 sessions. I was present for all 3. I sat at a conference table in Patricia Helm's office across from Gerald Finch and, in the second and third sessions, across from Marcus himself. I want to tell you what that was like. It was not what I expected. The first time I saw Marcus across that table, I expected to feel something large. Anger. Grief. Something with size to it. What I felt was smaller than that. Quieter. It was something closer to the feeling you get when you have been carrying a heavy ruck for a very long time and you finally set it down. Not triumph. Not relief exactly. Just the absence of the weight. The absence of something you had gotten so used to carrying that you had stopped noticing it was there. Marcus looked tired. He looked like a man who had been running a calculation in his head for months and had finally accepted that the numbers did not work in his favor. He did not look at me directly very often. When he did, I held his gaze and waited for him to look away first. He always did. In the third session, Gerald Finch put a settlement proposal on the table. Marcus would relinquish his claim to the house on Dogwood Lane. The equity was mine. Marcus would repay the $11,240 in cash withdrawals as part of the asset division. Marcus would sign over his interest in the joint vehicles. RV Thermal Partners LLC would be dissolved. My name would be formally removed from all filings with a court-notarized correction. In exchange, I would not pursue additional civil action related to the fraudulent use of my identity in the LLC filing. The criminal referral to the DA was not within my power to withdraw, and I told them that clearly. That was the DA's decision, not mine. Patricia Helm reviewed the proposal overnight. The next morning she called me. She said, "It's a strong settlement. It gives you the house, the restitution, and the clean record. The only thing you're giving up is a civil suit that would take years and cost significant attorney's fees." I said, "And the criminal referral stays." She said, "Completely independent." Yes. I was quiet for a moment. I looked out my kitchen window at the back porch where Marcus used to pace on his phone calls. I thought about Master Sergeant Dolores Pruitt. Slow is smooth. Smooth is fast. I said, "Tell them yes." I signed the settlement agreement on a Thursday afternoon in June. Marcus signed across the table from me. We did not shake hands. We did not say anything to each other. Patricia Helm notarized the signatures and collected the copies. I stood up from the table and picked up my bag. Marcus said my name. I stopped. He said, "For what it's worth." "I'm sorry." I looked at him. I said, "I know you are." I did not say anything else. I walked out of Patricia Helm's office on Franklin Street, and I stood on the sidewalk in the June afternoon, and I looked at the ghost of the old hardware store sign on the brick above me. Still there, if you looked at the right angle. Then I walked to my car. I drove home on Fort Campbell Boulevard. I turned onto Dogwood Lane. I parked in my own driveway. I sat for a moment. Then I went inside. Into my house. The summer that followed was the quietest I had known in years. And I mean that in both directions. Quiet in the way that absence is quiet. The house on Dogwood Lane had been built for two people, and for a while it echoed with that. I would come home in the evenings and the silence would meet me at the door, and I would have to make a deliberate choice about what to do with it. I made the choice every time to fill it with something real. I cooked actual meals. Not things that could be eaten standing over the sink, which is what soldiers resort to when they are eating alone and do not want to acknowledge that they are eating alone. I sat at the kitchen table with a plate and a fork and my green notebook, and I ate, and I thought, and I wrote things down. I ran more. Earlier. Longer routes. I knew every street within 3 miles of my house by June. By July, I had added 2 miles to my standard PT route and could run it in under 40 minutes. I called my mother every Sunday. I let First Sergeant Witt know that the legal situation had resolved and that I was fully operational. She said, "You never stopped being fully operational." I said, "No, ma'am." She said, "Good. Because I'm putting you in for Master Sergeant." I stood in the Fort Campbell parking lot with my phone in my hand, and for a moment I did not say anything. Then I said, "Thank you, First Sergeant." She said, "Don't thank me. You earned it. Now get back to work." There is a difference between forgiving someone and letting them keep hurting you. I learned that difference that summer. I want to be careful about how I say this, because I do not want it to sound simple. It was not simple. There were nights in that quiet house when I would be washing the dishes or folding laundry or doing something completely ordinary, and something would hit me sideways. A memory. The sound of a truck in the street. The smell of the particular coffee he used to make on Sunday mornings. Those moments had weight. I did not pretend they didn't. But I also did not let them become the whole story. Because here is what I know about grief. The Army does not teach you this explicitly, but it teaches you implicitly through every field exercise and every deployment and every moment of sustained difficulty you survive. Grief is not the enemy. Avoidance is the enemy. You do not get through something by going around it. You get through it by walking straight into it and keeping your eyes open and trusting that you have the training and the discipline to come out the other side. I walked straight into that summer. I kept my eyes open. I came out the other side. In August, I got a call from the Rutherford County District Attorney's Office. A paralegal named Sandra reached me on my cell phone on a Tuesday afternoon. She said the DA's office had reviewed the referral from Patricia Helm regarding the forged signature on the RV Thermal Partners LLC filing. She said they had decided to file charges. Identity fraud. Forgery of a legal document. Marcus had 30 days to respond. I thanked Sandra. I hung up. I sat in my car in the Fort Campbell parking lot, and I took out my green notebook. I opened it to the last entry. I wrote, DA filing confirmed. Tuesday, August. I looked at the first entry in the notebook. April. The night I had stood at the kitchen counter in my ACUs and read the letter from the Secretary of State. Renata M. Voss. Registered Agent. RV Thermal Partners, LLC. I had filled 31 pages since that night. 31 pages of dates and figures and notes and observations. Small green notebook from the dollar store on Fort Campbell Boulevard. Write it down. I had not been taught that by the Army specifically. I had been taught it by my mother. She used to say it when I was a girl coming home from school with something that had upset me. A teacher who had been unfair. A friend who had said something wrong. She would sit me down at the kitchen table on Highway 41A, and she would say, write it down. Everything you remember. The date. What was said. What you felt. Write it down before it gets away from you. I had thought she was teaching me to journal. She was teaching me to document. She had been a waitress for 22 years. She had seen people try to walk out on checks. She had seen managers short her tips. She had seen coworkers take credit for her side work. She had written all of it down. In a small notebook she kept in her apron pocket. She never needed most of it. But when she needed it, she had it. My mother, who never asked the world for more than it offered her. She had been preparing me for this my whole life. I sat in that parking lot, and I held the green notebook in both hands. And I thought, she knew. She always knew. I am going to tell you one more thing about that summer before I tell you how everything ended. In September, about a week before the DA proceedings began, I got a phone call from a number I did not recognize. I almost did not answer. I answered. It was her. The other person. She said my name. Just my name. Like she was checking to make sure I was there. I said yes. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, I didn't know he was married. Not at first. By the time I figured it out, I was already in it. I know that's not an excuse. I'm not calling to make excuses. I just thought you deserved to know that I didn't know. I listened to her. I let her finish. Then I said, I appreciate you telling me. She said, I'm sorry. For what it's worth. I said, I believe you. And I did. Because hating her would have required me to redirect energy I needed for other things. Because the person who had made vows to me was Marcus. Not her. I said, take care of yourself. She said, you too. I hung up. I sat for a moment. Then I drove home. Into my house. My sage green kitchen. My blue enamel mug. My life. Which was still mine. Which had always been mine. I want to tell you something about military courtrooms before I tell you about the one I walked into in September. I have given testimony before. Formal proceedings. Line of duty investigations. Property accountability hearings where millions of dollars of equipment were on the line and the room was full of officers who had decided before you opened your mouth what they believed, and you had to change their minds with nothing but documentation and composure. I knew how to walk into a room where something important was being decided. I knew how to sit in a chair and speak clearly and let the record do the heavy lifting. The Rutherford County Criminal Court was not a military courtroom. But the principles were the same. Show up. Sit straight. Let the documentation speak. The proceedings began on a Wednesday morning in late September. I wore my Class A uniform. Not because I was required to. I was there as a civilian witness, not as a soldier on official duty. I wore it because it was the most honest representation of who I was. Who I had built myself into over 12 years. What I had earned. What no one could take from me regardless of what they forged or withdrew or planned in a shadow company while I was serving overseas. Patricia Helm sat beside me in the gallery. She had prepared me thoroughly. She had told me what to expect. She had told me that my role was to answer questions clearly and completely and to refer to my documentation when needed and to say I do not know when I did not know rather than estimating. I had told her that was how I operated in every formal proceeding I had ever been in. She had said, I know. That's why I'm not worried about you on the stand. I was called to testify on the second day of proceedings. The assistant district attorney was a woman named Claire Soto, mid-30s. Precise. She asked her questions in a logical sequence that moved through the timeline the way a well-written operations order moves through phases. She established who I was. She established my marriage to Marcus Voss and the date of our union. She established that I had never registered a business in the state of Tennessee. She established that I had never signed the RV Thermal Partners LLC filing. She presented the certified copy of the filing. Page 4. The signature. She asked me to look at it. She asked me if that was my signature. I said, no ma'am. It is not. She asked me how I could be certain. I said, I have signed my name on legally binding documents for 12 years as a non-commissioned officer in the United States Army. My signature has specific characteristics that are consistent across every document I have ever signed. The signature on page 4 of that filing does not have those characteristics. She asked me to describe the characteristics. I described them. She presented 2 exhibits side by side. The forged signature and my actual signature from our marriage certificate. She asked the court to note the differences. The differences were visible. Howard Beale cross-examined me for 40 minutes. He asked if I could be certain I had not signed the document during a period of stress or distraction. I said, I am certain. He asked if it was possible I had signed something without reading it fully. I said, in 12 years of military service, I have never signed a legal document without reading it fully. That is not a habit I am capable of. He asked if my relationship with my husband had been under strain during the period in question. I said, my husband was under strain. I was documenting. The room shifted. I did not notice the room shifting. I was looking at Howard Beale and waiting for the next question. The next question did not come. Howard Beale looked at his notes. He said, no further questions. I stepped down from the stand. I walked back to my seat in the gallery. I sat down next to Patricia Helm. She put her pen down on her legal pad. That was how I knew it had gone well. Patricia Helm only put her pen down when she did not need to take any more notes. The proceedings continued for 2 more days. The DA presented the bank records, the mileage logs, the vendor contracts through RV Thermal Partners that used the Voss Climate Solutions client list without authorization. They presented testimony from 2 of Marcus's clients who confirmed they had paid for services and received checks made out to RV Thermal Partners when they had contracted with Voss Climate Solutions. They presented a forensic document examiner named Dr. Eunice Tran who had analyzed the signature on page 4 of the LLC filing and concluded with professional certainty that it was not consistent with the known signature samples provided by Renata M. Voss. On the 4th day, Howard Beale requested a recess. During the recess, Gerald Finch appeared in the hallway. He pulled Patricia Helm aside. I sat on a bench outside the courtroom and watched them talk through the glass. Patricia Helm came back and sat beside me. She said, he wants to offer a plea. I said, what kind? She said, guilty to 1 count of identity fraud. Forgery charge reduced to a civil infraction. Sentencing recommendation of probation, community service, and full restitution. She said, this is not your decision. The DA decides whether to accept. But they will ask if you have a preference. I said, what is your read? She said, a guilty plea on record is a guilty plea. He admits to using your identity without consent. That is permanent. I looked at the courtroom door. I thought about what I wanted out of this. I had never wanted Marcus in prison. I had never wanted to destroy him. I had wanted the record to be accurate. I had wanted the truth to be on paper. I had wanted the world to know that Renata M. Voss had not consented to any of this. A guilty plea did that. I said, tell them I have no objection to the plea. Marcus entered a guilty plea on a Thursday morning. I was in the gallery when he stood before the judge. The judge was a woman named the Honorable Frances Alderman. Silver-haired. Measured. She had a way of looking at the person in front of her that suggested she had seen every possible version of this situation and was not impressed by any of them. She asked Marcus how he pleaded. He said, guilty, Your Honor. His voice was steady. I will give him that. He stood there and said it clearly. Judge Alderman looked at him for a moment. She said, Mr. Voss, you used your wife's name and forged her signature on a legal document while she was serving this country. You used marital funds to fund a business she did not know existed. You did this over a period of months with deliberate planning. She paused. She said, "Is there anything you would like to say before I accept this plea?" Marcus was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "No, Your Honor. There isn't." Judge Alderman looked at him for another moment. Then she said, "Plea accepted." She set down her gavel. The sound carried. I sat in that gallery in my Class A uniform, and I let it carry. I did not move. I did not react. I just sat there and let the sound settle into the room the way the truth settles when it finally finds its place. It does not crash. It does not explode. It just arrives. Quietly. And stays. The promotion board results came back on a Friday morning in October. I was at my desk in the S4 shop when First Sergeant Witt walked in. She did not knock. She did not need to. She set a single piece of paper on my desk face down. She said, "Turn it over when I leave." She walked out. I looked at the door for a moment. Then I turned it over. Master Sergeant Renata M. Voss. Effective date, 1st of November. I sat at my desk and looked at that paper for a long time. 12 years. 2 deployments. Kuwait and Afghanistan and Fort Campbell and Dogwood Lane and a green notebook from the dollar store and 31 pages of dated entries and a Thursday afternoon in a Rutherford County courtroom. All of it had brought me to this piece of paper. I set it down. I picked up my phone. I called my mother. She answered on the second ring. Same as always. I said, "Mama." I made Master Sergeant. She was quiet for exactly 1 second. Then she made a sound I had never heard her make before. Not crying exactly. Something bigger than crying. Something that had been waiting a long time to come out. She said, "Baby, your grandmother would have lost her mind." I laughed. Real laughter. The kind that comes from somewhere deep and does not apologize for itself. I said, "I know." She said, "You write that down." I said, "Yes, ma'am. I will." November brought the new rank and a new set of responsibilities and a section that needed tightening, and I threw myself into it with everything I had. Not to avoid the quiet at home. The quiet at home had become something I did not need to fill anymore. It had become something I could sit inside of comfortably. That was new. That had taken time. I want to be honest about that. The healing was not linear. There were mornings in October when I woke up at 3 in the morning and lay in the dark and ran the timeline again in my head. Not obsessively. Just the way you debrief a completed mission. Looking for what you missed. What you could have caught earlier. What you would do differently. The answer was always the same. I would have paid attention sooner. Not because I owed Marcus suspicion. Because I owed myself presence. There is a difference between trust and absence. I had been absent. Not because I was weak. Because I was busy. Because I had a career and a mission and a section to run, and I had trusted that the home front was holding because a man with warm hands and a wide smile had told me it was. I had trusted instead of verified. That was the lesson. Not that people cannot be trusted. That trust is not the same as attention. You can trust someone and still pay attention. You can love someone and still keep your eyes open. I know that now. My mother came up for Thanksgiving. She brought the cast iron pot again. Turkey and dressing this time. Sweet potato pie from a recipe that had been in her family since before I was born. A recipe she had never written down because she said some things lived in the hands, not on paper. We ate at the kitchen table. Just the two of us. The sage green walls and the oak tree visible through the window and the blue enamel mug on the counter and a new warmth in the house that I had not expected to find this quickly. After dinner, my mother pushed her plate back and looked at me the way she had looked at me my whole life. Like she was reading something behind my eyes that I had not said out loud yet. She said, "How are you?" Really? I thought about it. I said, "I am better than I thought I would be by now." She nodded. She said, "You always land on your feet. You got that from your grandmother." I said, "I got it from you." She shook her head. She said, "Your grandmother. She was the one who taught me to write things down." Did I ever tell you that? I said, "No." She said, "She kept a notebook her whole life. Everything important. Dates. Names. What was said. She used to say the truth doesn't need help. It just needs a record." I looked at my mother across the table. This woman who had worked 22 years in a diner and raised me on a waitress's wages and taught me the most important skill I had ever used. Not from a manual. Not from a field exercise. From a spiral notebook bought at the Piggly Wiggly for 50 cents. I said, "Why didn't you ever tell me about Grandma's notebook?" She said, "I didn't think I needed to. You always had one in your pocket." She smiled. I looked at my hands around my coffee mug. The blue enamel one. I thought about my grandmother, who I had never met, keeping a notebook her whole life. I thought about my mother keeping one in her apron pocket for 22 years. I thought about my green dollar store notebook with 31 pages of dated entries. 3 women. 3 notebooks. 1 truth passed down without anyone calling it a lesson. In December, I heard from Patricia Helm one last time. She called to let me know that the restitution payment from Marcus had been processed and deposited. $11,240. Plus the legal fees stipulated in the settlement. She said, "It's done. The LLC dissolution is final. Your name is clear on all filings. The criminal matter is closed with a guilty plea on record." I said, "Thank you, Patricia." She said, "Thank you for being the most prepared client I have had in 20 years. I said, "I had a good teacher." She said, "Your attorney?" I said, "My mother." She laughed. I did too. I sat with the restitution for a few days before I decided what to do with part of it. I called the Family Readiness Office at Fort Campbell in December. I asked about the Family Advocacy Program, specifically about whether they had financial literacy resources for military spouses dealing with financial fraud or economic abuse within marriages. The coordinator said they had limited resources for that specific situation. I said, "What would it take to create something?" She said, "A proposal." "And funding?" I said, "I have both." I spent 2 evenings in December writing a proposal for a financial documentation workshop for military spouses. Not a therapy program. Not a support group. A practical, skills-based workshop. How to keep records. How to access your own financial accounts. How to recognize when your financial identity is being used without your consent. How to document. How to write it down. I submitted the proposal in January. It was approved in February. The first workshop ran on a Saturday morning in March in the community center on Fort Campbell. 14 spouses attended. I taught it myself. I stood at the front of that room in my civilian clothes with a green notebook in my hand, and I told them what I knew. Not my whole story. Just the skills. Just the tools. Just what my mother and her mother before her had tried to pass down to anyone who would pay attention. Write it down. The date. What was said. What you felt. Before it gets away from you. 14 people sat in those chairs and took notes. And I thought about my grandmother with her lifetime notebook. And my mother with her apron pocket notebook. And my green dollar store notebook with 31 pages. And I thought, this is how it goes forward. Not in a courtroom. Not in a settlement agreement. In a room full of people who are writing things down. I am going to tell you where I am now. It is a Saturday morning in early spring. I am sitting at the kitchen table on Dogwood Lane with a cup of coffee in my blue enamel mug. The oak tree in the front yard has started to come back. New leaves at the ends of the branches. Pale green. The kind of color that looks uncertain at first, and then looks inevitable once it fills in. I am a Master Sergeant in the United States Army. I have served for 13 years. I have been to Kuwait and Afghanistan and back. I have run property books worth millions of dollars and never lost a line item. I have built a case against a man I loved with 31 pages of dated entries in a green notebook from the dollar store. I have testified in a courtroom in my Class A uniform and watched the truth land the way truth lands when it is documented. I have sat in this kitchen alone and let the quiet be what it was without trying to make it into something else. I am 30 years old. I have my whole life in front of me. And I want to tell you something before I let you go. This story is not about Marcus. I know it sounds like it is. I know it sounds like a story about a man who made bad choices and got caught. But that is not what I have been trying to tell you. I have been trying to tell you about my mother standing in her diner on Highway 41A for 22 years with a notebook in her apron pocket. I have been trying to tell you about a grandmother I never met who kept a record of her whole life and passed that habit down through her daughter without either of them ever calling it survival. I have been trying to tell you about a 19-year-old girl who walked into a recruiter's office on a Tuesday morning at 5:45 because she needed structure the way other people need sleep. That girl became a soldier. That soldier became a master sergeant. That master sergeant sat at a kitchen table in a sage green kitchen and documented the truth until the truth had no choice but to stand up in a courtroom and speak for itself. That is the story. Not the betrayal. The documentation. Not the fall. The record. I want to tell you something about blue-collar people one more time before I close. Marcus fixed other people's air so they could breathe. My mother brought people their food so they could eat. My grandmother kept records so the truth would not get away from her. None of them were celebrated for it. None of them had monuments or ceremonies or promotions that came with new rank sewn on a uniform. They just showed up. Every day. They used what they had. They kept their records. They wrote it down. That is the blue-collar heart. Rough hands. Soft center. Working hard and loving even harder. And when someone tries to take what is yours, documenting every single thing. I keep the green notebook on the kitchen table now. Not because I am still documenting a case. Because it reminds me of something. It reminds me that the truth does not need help. It just needs a record. And I am very good at keeping records. I pick up my blue enamel mug. The coffee is still warm. Outside the kitchen window, the oak tree is filling in. Pale green becoming certain green. Uncertain becoming inevitable. I think about my grandmother. I think about my mother. I think about a recruiter's office on a Tuesday morning at 5:45. I think about a deployment ceremony at Fort Campbell where a man pressed a blue mug into my hands and said, "Bring this back." I brought it back. I always bring things back. That is who I am. That is who I have always been. A woman who shows up at 5:45. Who writes it down? Who brings it back? Write it down. My grandmother said it with a notebook she kept her whole life. My mother said it with a spiral pad in an apron pocket. I said it in a courtroom in Rutherford County, Tennessee in my Class A uniform on a Wednesday morning in September. And I am saying it to you now. Whatever they are doing. Whatever you suspect. Whatever that quiet voice in you is trying to tell you that you keep explaining away. Write it down. The date. What was said. What you felt. Before it gets away from you. Because the truth always leaves a paper trail. And the woman who knows how to follow it always finds her way home.